All right, so now we start with organizational culture, where we look at the different aspects that people have in terms of influencing how people feel in organizations and how work is executed. So in this chapter, some of the things that you should pay specific attention to has to do with how we define organizational culture. And in that context, we're going to talk about socialization. We need to explain the difference in how some employees talk in a positive way about cultures and how some people can be actually negative and influence how people feel and work in the organization. And we're going to describe the impact of the organizational culture on how people work individually and in teams. We also need to understand the role of spirituality and how that could have some positive benefits in the workplace. We're not talking about religion, we're just talking about people's sense of self and how they fit. We're also looking at identifying different practices that organizations can use and that you can learn to help make the socialization process more effective so people feel included in the organization and feel motivated to work. Edgar Schein is someone that you should know who's has a wide body of research on organizational culture. He defines organizational culture by a pattern of assumptions discovered by or developed by a given group. So we'll talk a little bit more about them. They work well enough to be considered valid. People talk about them as if they exist in terms of artifacts. People teach them to new members. They tell stories about it, and people learn to think and feel that way in the organization so that it becomes a certain kind of culture, just like we have an American culture, a Japanese culture, an African type of culture. We have organizations that are identified by their particular cultures too. Some examples of organizational culture: when you walk into an organization, you'll see certain, like their letterhead and the documents and how the place is laid out, where they have open offices or they have glass offices or they have closed offices or corner offices, languages that people use, whether they have acronyms or jargon that's specific to that organization. They have work ethics, whether they have people that are on flex time because they have family concerns, or whether also how people feel loyal and committed to the organization, how much they're willing to work for the organization, do overtime, help do travel, help out other people, how it looks that there's some equity across who has the responsibilities, that you don't have the workload is fair, and that people feel that the kind of work they do, that they're getting paid, whether it's salary or benefits, in a fair way. When you look at this particular slide, it kind of spells out organizational culture in different layers. Sometimes they show it as sort of an iceberg, and the top of the iceberg, which is sort of the artifacts and creations, are the things that are very visible to people internally and even externally. They're very valid, but sometimes, and not always. Not always people from the outside see it, but it's well known. So what kind of technologies people use, how modern are they? What kind of behavior patterns are acceptable in the organizations? When we go down to the next level that deal with values, we're looking at the awareness that people have in terms of how they care for other people, how they work in groups and teams, and so forth. And when we look at what is called basic assumptions on this particular slide, we're looking at things that are very, very deep-rooted in an organization, and they're very invisible, and they're almost at an unconscious level, but people sense them, and how people work together. A key aspect of organizational culture has to do with what values people have in terms of the difference between right and wrong, whether they cheat or not, or steal things from the organization, how they want to guide behavior in terms of integrity. We also look at how well the organization shares those values among employees. Do some people feel a sense of integrity and responsibility and others don't? And that's part of organizational values. When we look at the society's values, they actually impact organizational values. So people come into organizations with certain values about how they want to work, how they want to spend their free time, how they work with their family, what kind of public service they have to the community, and that's also part of organizational culture. We look at people's expectations, we look at their values, and we look at their attitudes, and that also builds organizations. The more employees share and accept the core values in the organization, we have a more powerful organizational structure, and we also have a more powerful culture where people will be able to, the organization can often be more effective when there's a good, strong culture. It can also eventually meet with some kind of resistance when people feel like they become too much of a cult or something, depending on that culture. When we look, we ultimately we want to build a positive culture, and here's some different conditions that help build that culture. People will often tell stories about things that happen where somebody did something or that solved a problem, and it'll kind of live on with the organization. It kind of builds a sense of community. They might also see that about leadership and role models, and it builds sort of expectations. They might also see how groups and teams have performed and what they do and how that is being a part of a group. And they might also look at some of the interpersonal behavior and that happens among people, like when they're in the lunchroom, when they travel on trips, when they work at meetings, and so forth. And that overall develops organizational culture and makes for a positive work situation for people. So when we look at types of culture in organization, they have done some research to show that we can see some different variations of culture. Some of you have worked or experienced organizations that are very bureaucratic. They have lots of rules, they have policies, they have different chains of commands. It's very central in terms of how decision making goes. We also have what's called a clan culture, where we have a family-owned business, and they might have traditions and rituals and teamwork around what we call sort of a family. Sometimes people that aren't even families try and build up a family type of environment. We also have the entrepreneurial culture, where people are risk takers, they're innovative, they are very competitive, they're very autonomous, they like opportunities, they seek a lot of change. And then we have a type of culture of an organization that's very market oriented. They're looking for how they can increase sales, how they can build contracts. Usually there's not as much cohesion in these kind of organizations because they're really following the money. There's also subcultures in organizations. So we might have an overall culture, but there might be different departments or something that that people have sort of a subculture. And an example of that's in your book when we talk about how programmers might be in Microsoft, and how they feel they're very independent, but yet overall Microsoft is a very marketing type of organization. We also look at conflict, and sometimes that conflict hasn't been exposed prior to a merger, or may have caused them to fail. There's an example in your book about Nike, whether they were going to buy North Face, and there was a decision not to. And because most of the decision had to do with Phil Knight, who was the CEO of Nike, thinking that the cultures would not be a match. Now that doesn't really happen very often, where a merger is considered in regards to the blending of two different cultures. But if you see from our data here that less than 25% of all mergers and acquisitions are successful. And the reason that they usually fail is due to cultural factors, not necessarily because of the financial implications or the market, because that's usually a positive thing for why they went into a merger. When organizations are merging and considering culture, they need to go back and examine some of those basic things and how well they can blend with each organization. Do we have compatible compensation systems? Do we have people that are compatible in terms of our talent pool? Do we have technology that matches and blends or can be adapted? And do we have values and expectations that are something that will make it easier for the different organizations to get along well? Also, some cultures are not as easy to define. They tend to be a little bit more elusive, and they can't, deliberate attempts to try and change them aren't that easy. There's some, like I said, when we looked at the previous chapter, the basic assumptions and underlying things might actually cause some problems, and people go through a lot of anxiety when when they're trying to change some sort of a culture. There's a natural resistance to change when people aren't involved in the change process. You can see from this particular slide that there's cultural change intervention points. I mean, just about everything can be an intervention point. Just learning processes, communication processes, non-performing employees, how we socialize a new employee, how we hire and recruit people. All of that are places where we can influence culture. One of the things that was brought up at the beginning of the chapter was about spirituality. And Smith and Raymond, who are talked about in your book, talk about how people want to work in organizations where they can find meaning. We're particularly seeing that our generation X and Y and so forth are They want a job that has some kind of meaning. They want to feel some kind of connectedness and wholeness, and that's something that we need to think about. We can't just expect workers to just do their job and not take a look at how it is overall in their growth and who they are. It's not about religion and so forth. It's just about saying, hey, am I working for a company that makes a product or a service that I feel proud of, that I can support, that I can help sell, that I can find, work with people who I feel a wholeness about. And that's really what they're talking about when they're talking about spirituality in the workplace. Lots of benefits of having an environment where people feel safe is that we allow them more creativity. People tend to be more honest. People tend to feel more trusting towards the people that they work with. All of those in the research has shown that there's improved organizational effectiveness when we have an organization that blends with people's sense of connectedness and need. One of the benefits of having sort of a workplace that has an orientation towards the workers has to do with integrity, community, having a work-life balance, and having a broader view of how the organization fits into the world. Some of the criticisms of organizations that seem to be quite spiritual is they almost seem kind of preachy. Their values, they tend to, hold them out in front of people, and they show, that it gets to be irritating. It almost keeps people away when they get to be almost kind of preachy about what they're doing. Another aspect about when we bring people into the organization is they get socialized to the culture. You've probably maybe had a job yourself where you just started and you look at people and you go, wow, these people, I don't know if I'm going to fit in here or not. So as a manager in an organization, you have to say, how can I socialize people so that they can feel welcome and that they can come into this culture and feel that they can be productive right off? And we have 3 stages of socialization that also generally match with career development. We have that stage that's called the anticipatory stage. That's, when people go, what's it going to be like, this job? And they have, what am I going to do? And they have an idea about how they're going to grow and what's going to be within that, whether they're taking a new job or they're taking a job within the same organization. Next, we have accommodation that occurs after they either make that job change or after they come into the organization, and how it really is. What's the realistic job situation? How do I establish relationships with people? Who do I need to be friends with or not? How do I learn my job? What's my role? How do I get assessment as I'm going along in terms of how I fit in? And then once I do find my role, how do I manage that role? How do I make sure that I don't work 70 hours a week and wreck my home life? Or how do I, make sure that I'm keeping my commitment to the people that I work with and, making sure that I have a balanced life? So we have those socialization stages. The anticipatory stage involves recruitment, selection, job previews, career paths, all those important, and you'll see that as you look at the human resources department. We have that accommodation stage where we have orientation programs, we look at training programs, we have feedback, we have different work assignments, and we try to match them up with people that are good supervisors, that are demanding and fair. In the role management stage, we want to make sure that there's counseling available, that they have flexible work assignments, and that we really match the person to the situation, and that they have those kind of good work environments. In terms of socialization stage, we do want the new recruits in our organization to experience congruence, that what they thought they were going to get is what happens in the organization. In the accommodation stage, we want to make sure that we have orientation programs, training programs, and jobs that match what we also said, and that people shift right into feeling accommodated and welcome into the organization. And when we have the role management socialization stage, we really try to adapt to whether employees have some problems. Something's always happening in somebody's life. And in this particular case, we might want to assign mentors. And a mentor is defined as a friend, a coach, advisor, or sponsor, and they help a less experienced person through their career, and they, almost like their proteges. And mentors often initiate the relationship. It's, a lot of people go around and say, I want to find a mentor. Well, it doesn't always work that way. You really need to, it kind of happens in the process of kind of blending with someone who could be helpful to you, and they want to help you, and you want to, be helped by them. And you cultivate that role, and usually a mentor relationship can go anywhere from 6 months to several years. And once you start to catch up, it's time to kind of leave. And so there's a separation and then a redefining where this person may no longer be a mentor, but they actually may be a colleague or a friend. There's, within our organization, in terms of culture, we have to look at diversity and the human differences. We have people of all different race, nationality, different genders interacting, and we have to make sure that these differences are accommodated. Managers sometimes tend to favor the kinds of people that they're most comfortable with, and as a manager, you're going to need to be open and accommodating to all different kinds of mixes of people in the workplace. We have, like as I said earlier, physical attributes, race, sexual orientations, age differences. Lots of those things are creating challenges in today's organizations. We want to capitalize on that diversity. Actually, research has shown that when you have a more diverse organization, that it takes a little bit longer for them to get up to productivity, but overall they are more productive in the long run and more effective than an organization that tends to be more homogeneous, of people, everybody being the same. So one of the things that we also have to consider about diversity is language, that not everybody speaks English, and we need to make sure we accommodate some of that. How to train people, how to help them with cultural awarenesses so they don't say things to hurt other people's feelings. How do we match rewards and development so that it meets people's really ethnic background, and how we recruit, and how we also learn more about different aspects in the workplace about workforce diversity in terms of age, gender, and disabilities, how we accommodate those.